This is season 2, episode 19. And in this episode, I'm super excited because we're finally talking about emotions. And honestly, from my perspective, I did all of that leading up to it, 18 episodes, so that we could get to the good stuff, which is emotions. And it's all good stuff and it's all necessary. But emotions and emotional healing is where we really, really, really see our lives start to change. Why is that? Well, emotions determine the quality of your life. So the quality of your emotions is the quality of your life. And so if you have a life that is less than something that you love, remember Rise to Reign exists so that you can understand and have a framework to experience the fact that God wants you healed so you can wholeheartedly live your purpose and love your life. So if you don't love your life, if you're not having a great experience, it's because of your emotions. And you might be sitting here and saying, Amy, that's not true. I have this problem and I have that problem and I have, this is going on in the world is this and that and the other. Well, I understand all of that, but it's not the things that are going on in your life. It's not the trouble. It's not the challenges. It's the way that you feel. It's the way that those things make you feel. Similarly, you might be thinking, well, I can't be happy and enjoy my life until I get married or until I get a better job or until my neighbor's dog stops barking or until my mother-in-law starts being nice to me or whatever it is that's agitating your righteousness, peace, and joy. But that's not true either, because the thing that you want, whether it's like marriage or a new job, you want that thing really because of how you think it will make you feel. So that's where a lot of relationships go sideways, is because you get them, you get that person, you get the marriage, and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. And then you start looking for something else to make you feel good. So feelings and emotions are really important. And the good news is, this is what I really want to, tell the world. This is my message, is that you get to decide right now how you feel. No matter what's going on around you, no matter what you do have or don't have, what you're waiting for, you get to decide how you feel. And when you decide how you feel, you get to determine the quality of your life, no matter what. So the quality of your life is the quality of your emotions. So most of us have emotional patterning that makes it hard for us to enjoy our lives and makes it hard for us to be us. And so we're going to spend a lot of time, maybe through the end of the year. I don't know. But we're going to spend a lot of time on emotions because it's really, really, really important. And there's a lot to unpack. In this specific mini series, what I'm going to start with right now is emotional intelligence. And I'm going to do like an emotional intelligence 101, because EQ, or emotional intelligence, is really the foundation for emotional health and emotional healing. So once we really understand our emotions and how to embody them, then we can start like kind of working with them and healing them. So emotional intelligence 101. But before I do that, I know that some people just kind of jump in on the podcast and they haven't heard all the backgrounds. So what I want to do is quickly recap what Rise to Reign is. Rise to Reign is a framework for life healing. Remember, God wants you healed so you can wholeheartedly live your purpose and love your life. And so it's 7 categories or keys of wisdom applied to 7 categories. And starting in episode 2 of season 2, I went through all of the categories. I went through all of the keys of wisdom, the principles, and now we're on to the categories. So what are the 7 categories? Well, the 7 categories are the body, and then the complex of the soul is the second category. And inside the soul is mind, will, and emotions. I covered the mind, I covered the will. Now we're getting into the emotions, which is really like kind of the turning point. This is where the whole thing sort of turns on this like pivot, is the emotions. Then after the soul is the spirit, relationships, finances, creativity, and the pinnacle of the whole thing is your calling. So once you address these separate areas, apply these 7 principles onto the 7 categories, then that will not only reveal your calling, but also help you have the character to sustain it. All right, so without further ado, let's get into emotional intelligence 101. So, first, we have to ask ourselves, what is an emotion? Well, the definition of an emotion is a mental state that arises spontaneously rather than through conscious effort and is often accompanied by physiological changes. And so I like to explain an emotion as emotion or energy in motion. And it's really important to understand that because we can't see it or touch it or feel it, it seems kind of not real. But emotions are very, very real. They can be measured with certain certain machines, and they also have a chemical, they also have a physiological component. And if you don't believe me, think about the last time that you got nervous and you got like butterflies in your stomach, right? Those are chemicals in your body that race through your bloodstream and create physical changes. And like when your palms get sweaty and you have a sympathetic nervous response to how you're feeling. And there's a physical component, a chemical component to your emotions. They're very, very real. There's also a resonance to your emotions, and this is the part that other people can feel. So the physiological piece is inside of you, and you feel the butterflies in your stomach or the sweaty palms or the excitement, like the roller coaster feeling, like kind of bubbling up, or all of the things that your body feels when you have an emotion. That's for you. But the resonance, the energetic resonance of an emotion is what can be felt in your sphere. And sometimes it can be felt across further distances depending on certain types of like spiritual connections. And I'm not going to get into that in this episode, but understand that your emotional atmosphere can be felt and experienced by other people. And so an example of this is, how many times have you walked in a room where somebody had been fighting and or like having some kind of a dramatic incident, and they weren't fighting now and everything was quiet and calm, but you could tell, like we say you could cut the tension with a knife, right? Like that's the emotional atmosphere that you can feel that extends outside of your experience to other people's experience. And it's, of course, it's a combination of like body language or whatever, but there's an actual resonance that can be measured with machines, like a wavelength that can be measured with machines on feelings. And so I'm going to get into that, not in this episode, but later. This episode is on emotional intelligence. So we're going to learn some things about emotions, and then we're going to talk about how to interact with that knowledge that we learned. So emotional health is the ability to recognize emotions, to trace them to their roots, and to interact with them in empowering, conscious ways. So that's our goal when we talk about emotional healing, is that we want the ability, we want to develop the skill, really. And this is really something that's so important to know, is that this is a learned skill, just like balancing your checkbook or driving a car or cooking a meal or changing a diaper or doing a load of laundry or being an engineer or a brain surgeon. Like emotional health, emotional intelligence is a learned skill. It's not like something that you have or don't have. It's an actual skill that you learn. And sadly and unfortunately, it's not taught. It's not taught in school, and it's not taught in our homes. And I'm going to get to that, about how we arrange an environment in our homes where children actually grow up to be emotionally unintelligent. And many people in our generation, we just perpetuate it generation after generation. And so what I would like to do, my heart, is to change that and to be able to teach this skill to younger generations, but also to our generations, so that we can interact with our emotions in a healthy way and interact with other people's emotions, especially children's emotions, in a healthy way, and that we can kind of change this. Because emotional unhealth creates so much suffering. Just the inability to actually, recognize emotions and to trace them to their roots and interact with them in empowering, conscious ways causes so much suffering. I was talking to a person not too long ago, and this person really, really, really wanted to have a life partner. They really wanted to have somebody in their life that they could share their life with. But anytime anybody got close, they did things that sabotaged that connection. And the person is alone and lonely and not getting their objective because here's why. Because they're afraid of their feelings, because they don't know how to recognize their emotions, trace them to their roots, and interact with them in empowering and conscious ways. And we all do this to some extent. We sabotage things in our life and we run away from what we don't understand, what we fear, because we don't understand it and we've never been taught to handle and interact this way. And so we miss out on really the good stuff in life because we don't know how to feel. We don't know how to interact with our emotions in a healthy way. So it's really, really, really important to your relationships. It's important on your job. It's important in your parenting, in every area of your life. Emotional health is really important. Okay, so we can't talk about emotional health without talking about emotional numbing. So we spend enormous amounts of energy numbing and pushing down emotions we don't want to experience. And this is such an irony, okay? Because it takes so much more energy to stuff and numb an emotion than it does to actually just feel it and interact with it in an empowering, conscious way and process it through. That's easy. We're built for that. We are not built to stuff and numb. We are built to interact and feel our feelings and move through them. But because we don't have that skill, it's scary, and so we stuff and we numb. But numbing and stuffing only creates more disconnection between our thoughts, feelings, and our actions. And it also creates incongruence in relationships. It breaks trust because it looks like this, and I've covered this in the podcast quite a bit, but it looks like this. Like, let's say a husband and a wife are driving down the road and she's quiet. And he says, "Is everything okay? Are you okay?" And she says, "I'm fine." But she's not fine. And everybody knows she's not fine. But she doesn't have the emotional intelligence and the tools to actually work through that and have the conversation because she's afraid of her feelings or doesn't know how to interact with them in a healthy way. And he probably is perpetuating that because he doesn't really want to know the answer. Like when you ask somebody, "How are you doing?" Do you really want to know? That their dog died and that they're struggling and they're depressed and have a hard time getting out of bed. Like when we're afraid of our own feelings. And so when somebody else expresses emotion, it makes us extremely uncomfortable. And this is why children get enculturated and sort of brought into this emotional dysfunction, is because the parents are afraid of feeling their feelings. So they teach the children to stuff it down. Like, "You're fine. Quit crying, rub some dirt in it," because it triggers our own emotional upset and we don't know how to deal with that. So when you have two things going on there, when he says, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" He doesn't really want to know because he doesn't want to deal with her emotions. And then she doesn't know how to emotionally, intelligently deal with her emotions. So she says, "Fine." But back to the integrity episode, that creates a disconnect and it creates a disresonance and an incongruence in the relationship because it's basically a lie, and lies break trust. So in order for us to feel safe in our relationships, we have to be able to have the inside match the outside, right? So if you say, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" and I say, "Fine," I'm lying, and then you don't trust me. And this all happens on kind of a subconscious level, but it makes it where intimacy is hard to achieve, impossible to achieve, because we're not showing up as with what's true, and the inside isn't matching the outside. Okay, so that's emotional health and emotional numbing. So, what is then emotional intelligence? Well, in order to really unpack the concept of emotional intelligence, we have to sort of change our perspective and our paradigm. And so, this is one of the things that I say that's kind of a cornerstone of emotional health and emotional intelligence is that human beings are not a problem to be solved. Human beings are not a problem to be solved. We are individuals meant to be experienced. And so when we interact with ourselves and when we interact with other people, we need to come from that paradigm that we're not a problem to be solved. We're individuals meant to be experienced. So when we do the smaller Rise to Reign retreats, we do women's circles, and they're really, really amazing and impactful for emotional healing. But there's one of the kind of guidelines for the container of a women's circle that is really, really important. And I'll explain it to you so that you can kind of get the picture of this. When women are sitting around in a circle and there's a prompt and you know somebody has the opportunity to share, and usually when they're in this safe container, in this safe space, and they begin to share about a feeling or about a circumstance, and then the feeling surrounding that circumstance, a lot of times there'll be emotional expression. So it's like, they break down and cry, and they, can even be sitting there like racking sobs. And what does every other woman in the circle want to do when they are crying? You guys know, right? I wish I had a live audience because you would get this answer right. I know you would. They want to rush over and they want to pat her and they want to hug her and they want to be like, it's okay. Don't cry. It's okay. And they want to pat her on the back and be like, it's okay. Don't cry. Don't cry. It's okay. We want to comfort, and that's normal. That's an empathetic, compassionate response. But really what we want to do is get them out of that emotional expression so that we can feel not so triggered by our own emotional stuff that's stuffed down. So one of the guidelines is that when someone is expressing emotionally, is that we leave them completely alone. My guideline is that you can hand her a Kleenex and that's it. You can't touch her, can't talk to her. You leave her completely alone. And that seems maybe like mean or insensitive or uncompassionate. But really what it's doing is holding a container for her to express all the way through that emotion and be compassionately witnessed. So the people in the circle hold presence with her. Like they don't look away, they're not on their phones, they're holding presence with her, and they have their focused attention on her, and they're witnessing the emotional event, and it will move through her. It'll come up like a storm, and the storm will rage for a minute, and then will move through her, and then the seas are calm again. And that is how we deal with an emotion, is we let it come in, we feel it fully, and we let it go out. It comes in, we feel it, it's like a storm, and then the seas calm again, and it goes out. That's how you process an emotion. But with numbing, we feel it coming in and we're like, stuff, social media, eat something, drink something, don't want to feel that. And so emotional intelligence is looking at human beings as individuals meant to be experienced. So in the women's circle, she has an experience, and instead of trying to solve that problem, we hold presence with her and we experience her while she experiences herself. And that's how trauma is healed, you guys. Trauma is healed in community. Trauma is healed in relationships. And if we can hold a presence and a container in the space open for somebody to feel and express their emotions, they can be a whole person, and so can we. That is how trauma is healed in community. So in order to truly experience somebody else, we have to be able to identify and understand what is going on beneath the surface. It starts with identifying and understanding what is going on beneath our surface. So emotional intelligence, obviously with everything else as well, starts with the inside of you. Like the greatest work that you can do in the world is to work on you and to deal with the inside of you. And then you can interact with other people's emotions in a healthy way. An example of this is I used to get really, really triggered and really, really mad at my children when they wouldn't listen to me. And I mean, yeah, I know all the parents out there are like, duh, that irritates everybody. But it really upset me. I would feel like rage bubbling up when, specifically when I'd have to say something over and over and over again and they just ignored me. And I would feel just, it would just feel desperate, like this desperate rage. And obviously, when something, we have a saying, I'll get into this later. There is a saying, I'll get into it later. But if it's hysterical, it's historical. If it's hysterical, it's historical. So and by the way, that is from Miles Adcox at the on-site center, and he's amazing. But that's his saying. If it's historical, it's hysterical. So if you are feeling something that is inconsistent, or maybe a little bit much for this, like a response that's a little bit much for the stimuli, then you are going to want to look a little further to see what that is actually about. And what it ended up being, as I've done work around this issue, is I never had a voice as a child, and I was never listened to as a child. And I was always, my dad actually would say, children are to be seen and not heard. And my experience wasn't valued, and it wasn't encouraged. The expression of my experience wasn't encouraged. And so I had that, like pent up trauma and hurt around not being heard. So when my children wouldn't hear me, it would trigger that old thing. And so emotional intelligence is being able to sort of step out of the trigger and come conscious and come present in the trigger and go, wait a second, what am I feeling right now? And what is going on inside of me? And to interact with that intelligently. So we're able to identify and understand what is going on beneath the surface. And when you can do that for yourself, you can do that for someone else, like a child or a partner or a spouse or a coworker. And so emotional intelligence begins with understanding what and being able to identify what's going on beneath the surface of you. And then you can also interact with other people in a more like conscious way. Something that I get told all the time in my personal life, in my real life and relationships, is that I am very even, and I don't have highs and I don't have lows, and I'm just, I feel things, and I feel things really, really deeply, and I cry, and I feel sad, and I get mad, and of course I have like a rich emotional life, but I don't like go off, and it's so funny for me to hear that, because in my 20s and in my 30s, I was always going off, like just, and I would never know when it was coming. And then I was, just explode all over. And so it's interesting for me when I hear people say that to me, because it's like, okay, I have done a lot of work around this to be able to understand and identify what's going on in myself, and be able to interact with those emotions in a healthy way. And then the way that other people experience me changes. So by way of a definition, emotional intelligence is the skillful exploration, identification, and management of emotions. So emotional intelligence is the skillful exploration, identification, and management of emotions. So I want to say right now, if you're like, oh, it's normal, like if you're hearing this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. Like, this is not my reality. I'm not emotionally intelligent. I don't know what. Well, I want to encourage you right now that you already have what you need. It's really, really important that you know that you're not too messed up. You're not too far gone. Those are lies. You already have what you need to be emotionally healthy and intelligent. And I also want to say that emotions are normal. Like, they're actually the human experience. You were born with the ability to be open and to be peaceful and to be joyful and present. We talk about in Rise to Reign with like your birthright and your homeostasis and your factory setting is righteousness, which is right relationships with God, yourself, and others, a state of being and doing right, a state of alignment. Peace, which is the Hebrew concept of shalom, which is human flourishing, nothing missing, nothing broken, and also, a calm feeling, but it's much richer and more robust than that. And joy. And joy, of course, those are all feelings. Righteousness, peace, and joy are all feelings. Now, those are broader concepts than just feelings, but at their core, when you say peace, you think of a peaceful feeling. If you say joy, you think about feeling joy. So emotions are the human experience, and you are born with the ability to feel them, and you're supposed to feel them. When you feel a negative emotion, or I don't like the word negative emotion, when you feel a difficult emotion, that is your invitation to understand that something is wrong. When you feel anger, that is your understanding that your sense of justice has been violated. When you feel sad, that is your indication to know that something that shouldn't be is. And so they're really, really important for diagnostics. There's a disorder. I'm going to talk about physical pain for a moment and give kind of the container for you to see how emotions work like this too. But pain is a really, really useful concept in our body. It helps us learn. So we have a drive to avoid pain. As humans, we have a drive to avoid pain and gain pleasure. But our drive to avoid pain is way stronger than our even drive to achieve or gain pleasure. So if you reach out and you touch a hot stove, that burns you, and you pull your hand back before hopefully before you get a burn, or your hand burns off your wrist, because you felt pain and then you learned, oh, stove hot, I don't want to touch that. And so that is how we learn. Well, there's a disorder where people can't feel pain, and they usually die because they can't feel their pain, and they put themselves in situations where their body is unsafe, and they usually don't live very long. So it's really important to have pain so that you know when a boundary has been crossed or when something harmful is taking place. And emotions are the same exact way. It is such a gift to be able to feel pain, because when you feel pain, you have an indication that something is wrong, and you need to feel that feeling so that you can fully be committed and motivated to address what's wrong. I mentioned before, I've told this story before, but when I was coming to a real breaking point in my marriage, I knew that I had to stop drinking alcohol, because I was using alcohol to numb the feeling of misery that was a natural response to what was going on in my marriage. And so when I stopped drinking and I let that experience, I fully experienced that feeling, it motivated me to actually do something about it, which for years and years I hadn't, because I had been numbing that feeling away. I hope that makes sense. It's really, really important that you feel your feelings and you know how to interact with them, because they give you the information that you need to conduct your life. So you already have what you need to be emotionally and healthy and intelligent. Emotions are the human experience. You were born with the ability to be open, peaceful, joyful, and present. Unfortunately, we've all been conditioned to settle down, don't cry, suck it up, and get over it, because usually of our parents or our caregivers' inability to feel and express their emotions. So this comes from the fact that we're emotionally repressed, and another emotes in front of us, it creates discomfort within ourselves. So when our parents or our caregivers saw us emoting, it triggered their emotional repression, and they want us to settle down so that they can be okay. It's really a codependent response. And so there's so much more to cover on this topic, and I'm so excited to do it, but we are out of time with this. So this is part 1 of Emotional Intelligence 101, and part 2 will be next week. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.